Hey everyone, Alex here from Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. Hope everybody had a fantastic Memorial Day weekend. And we are here this week in a post Memorial Day edition of Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. Today, I wanted to take a moment to talk a lot about what we just saw coming out of this year's first major holiday for the camping industry, how it's evolving, what's happening. And I hear a lot of conversations with GMs like myself and others in the industry about the shrinking and contraction of the RV and camping industry and where things stand right now. So I wanted to kind of share some data, talk a little bit about our mission here, and really just share how I see the industry evolve as we head into the latter part of 2026. So dive in with me for a special edition this week, and Matt and I will be back here next week for our typical edition. Over Memorial Day weekend, nearly 45 million Americans traveled. This is according to data from AAA. Campgrounds are busy, maybe not as busy as they usually were, but busy. And families still chose to camp in the outdoors. I think that tells us a lot about where the industry actually stands and what's really important. Now, we've heard a lot of mixed signals lately, from bookings slowing to shorter booking windows entirely, some consumer caution with recent events like the war in Iran and struggling gas prices, and softer RV sales in some segments, as we've covered here in some past weeks. While the used RV market remains strong, new RVs are not being produced and sold at such a high rate, leading to people not upgrading and taking less frequent trips with their new units. But Memorial Day weekend reminded me that demand for experiences, connection to each other, and outdoor travel still remains incredibly resilient. Now, at least for here at our park in Michigan, this was one of our better Memorial Days that we've experienced. Part of this being due to a shift in our business long before Memorial Day started to take place. We were already beginning to reposition and transition the property into a much more balanced approach, focusing on both long-term bookings with guys like linemen, nurses, construction guys, really focusing a portion of our property on these long-term stay cases, while also preserving a portion of our park for the classic transient weekend camper who has potential to spend in high ancillary income while on the property. Things like your retail, your experiences, upsell opportunities, rentals, food and beverage, a hallmark of what makes family campgrounds great. Now, this market is not collapsing. In fact, it's normalizing and beginning to segment just like this in parks all across the country. You know, the easy years of campground money and COVID may be long behind us, but there are still many meaningful years ahead for campground operators and park owners who truly understand why the hospitality industry has been at the core of campgrounds for decades. As I stated in the opening, AAA projected that roughly 45 million Americans would travel over Memorial Day weekend. In fact, we had about 1.2 million people here in the state of Michigan travel in some capacity more than 50 miles for Memorial Day. This is a record, even with all of the high gas prices that we're seeing across the country. This matters because camping still remains one of the most affordable, flexible, and drivable vacation options for literally millions of people in America. The key difference being people are making different decisions with their behaviors this year. Yes, weather played a large role into our weekend here, and the weather was not great up until Monday when most of our campers were packing up and getting ready to go. So people are taking shorter trips. In fact, we had a lot of people that stayed very hyper local. I'm talking within, 10 to 15 miles of our park location that visited us for the first time because while they still wanted to take the trip, they weren't necessarily going to make that 50-mile trek to one of their classic campgrounds that they've been going to for decades. Part of this was accomplished through a lot of the marketing that we have been doing, really trying to push to broaden the scope of people that were choosing our park. And instead of focusing on that classic range of maybe 2 to 3 hours, 100 miles away from your location, we went hyper local, focusing on what are the things to do regionally? How are we inviting people in for staycations? And as a result, our shift was much, much better. In fact, the AP reported this week in AP News that families were choosing more nature-based trips and these type of local trips all across the country over traditional vacations to things like cruises or hotels, etc. A really great sign for campgrounds and the outdoor hospitality industry as a whole. Now, I wanted to also bring in a really great story that I saw in Woodall's this week from Toby O'Rourke, the CEO of Campgrounds of America, one of the largest, campground companies and the best known brand in this space, where she was talking about how camping demand is still here and it still exists, but expectations have changed among campers more broadly. And she really led the conversation talking all about, gas prices and the data that KOA was seeing. And it is true that in some areas, because of this kind of shift in RV sales and how people are taking trips, they have seen a drop in site nights. In fact, we're seeing people, although the number of people that say that they're campers and taking trips has remained very, very consistent, the number of trips that they are taking with that unit has shifted dramatically, right? And if you can imagine, if the used RV market remains strong, people aren't necessarily buying those new rigs anymore. People are more likely to maybe take that trip less frequently or go on those, bucket list trips less frequently than they have in the past. Hence, this return to more of a hyper local stay, really focused on, nature and amenities and just trying to just trying to pare that down. Now, Toby called this in her address the participation gap, and she was addressing folks from the RV industry who were seeing, again, new RV sales suffer. In fact, if you look at some of the data found in KOA's most recent Camping and Outdoor Hospitality report that Matt and I covered last week, there were more than 52 million campers in 2025. That's a 25% increase from 2019. That's a pre-COVID number. But camping frequency is down. The number of households that camp just one time rose up to 1/3. 34% of those 52 million people will only camp one time. And that may be that landmark trip for Memorial Day, for 4th of July, for Labor Day, right? Or to take that one big cross-country road trip that they take. So a lot of that frequency and that loss is going to come in camper nights at campgrounds. We've talked about this for years, that there is a shift in an ongoing evolution that's taking place with a sort of adjustment back to ADR and occupancy and how you're balancing that with site nights and what your rev pass is, right? It's a very complicated game, something that, I'm doing a lot from the GM chair. And we're seeing that site nights, across the industry is down. Again, we have taken an approach here at our property in Michigan to really try and combat this. In fact, my site nights, as I was looking at the data the other day, is flat. Our revenue for April and May is up significantly, like double digits up compared to last year. In some cases, my May is almost 100% up in terms of revenue compared to last year. Now, this is not all done through transient demand. In fact, our transient demand is slightly down compared to what last year was at this time. What we have done is, again, begin to shift the property to try and combat that. We begun to pair to more of a long-term RV camping approach, offering more monthly and flexible stay options to store your RV on site, and when booking 2 back-to-back weekends. There are really creative things that you can do to still maintain camper nights while also significantly grow revenue. Toby also highlighted in her speech that close to 5 to 8% of people who own an RV did not use it at all last year. And that number again rose. It's going to rise up to 3% from 5 to 8% this past year. That is a huge gap. That's 3% of the 52 million number figure that are going to skip going camping altogether. So that decline in participation, that really means something. And we are seeing that impact trickle down. Now, mixed signals are fairly common in our industry, but this year I think we're getting more of that sense more than ever. You have park owners like myself and others that I talk to that are doing fantastic. we are having our best year since we took over the property 3 years ago, and it's not even close. From the marketing and the new strategies that we put in place, we are better positioned now than we have been in a very, very long time. And there are others that are just like me that are in the industry. On the same token, there are other parks that are really struggling, where it is significant double-digit down growth compared to the year prior. And that's hard, particularly for parks in these amazing destinations where bucket list travel becomes really a hallmark of what you're doing. So there is some confusion that exists. And destination parks might be doing well. You have parks like mine that are more in a blue collar market between two great metros, also doing well. Public campgrounds at state and national parks are also still continuing to be heavily occupied. And parks that are really focusing on great experiences and delivering that, the park as the destination still remains a really high, that still remains a really great focus and something that is also performing really well. So what does this tell us, right? This is a lot of data, and we just came out of this, really busy, chaotic weekend, really is the first main indicator of how the season's going to look. You can tell a lot about your season based on what you're going to do in this high point. We've got 3 shots, especially at seasonal parks, to, really get close to 100% occupancy. We did not get there. And one data point that I saw this past week on LinkedIn showed that public campgrounds were around 75% occupied for Memorial Day, while private parks averaged right at about 60 to 70% across the industry. Now, our park was more close to 90 to 95% occupied this past weekend, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if your park was hovering at that low bar, that you weren't doing well. You've got to look at things like, what is the booking behavior? Has more competition showed up in your market? How are consumers, as we just talked through some of the data, being more selective with the trips that they're taking? And most importantly, what are you doing through hospitality and experiences to create that perceived value? I think that is such an important piece that Matt and I get on here and we talk about the news every week. And, our focus and goal from doing this type of podcast and putting out great educational material is to try and provide insight and perspective, right? For me to share, here's what's happening at my park. Hopefully this type of data will be valuable for others. And what I think is really important and incredible is that there is this community that exists where this hospitality and this network becomes very real. And providing that kind of value is a very, very clear message that you can send in your market. If you were investing in the experiences that your campers are having, in putting your team first, in providing those nature experiences, in reaching out to your local community, those are the parks that are separating and doing well. And even if you are down, you are probably absorbing much of the hit that you might have otherwise taken should you not have been doing something like that. So, with all that said, I hope that, number one, that is an encouraging note, right? To say, if you didn't hit 100% and you're used to hitting 100%, you're not alone. This is the data that's coming out right now. This is the experience that I'm having. This is the experience that I'm hearing other parks having. And where this, I think, where we need to take a step back is what Memorial Day means. I want to take I'm almost getting ahead of myself here because I have so much in my mind that I want to talk about coming out of this weekend. I'm gonna kind of share a little kind of emotional segment here and talk about just how our park operated. From a staffing and operational standpoint, this was a rough weekend, like how so many other parks operate as well, right? We were still not staffed as well as we could have been. The weather did not play a great role in keeping our campers happy. And, it can become a struggle, especially if you're an owner or an operator working 13, 14-hour days for multiple days in a row, right? I'm still tired today recording this on Tuesday, one day after the Memorial Day holiday has ended. But, we talk about occupancy and ADR and all of the metrics and the news stories and who's moving and shaking. But this is a really great time to remind ourselves why Memorial Day is so important in the first place. Not only for the service that folks who, made the ultimate sacrifice in remembrance, why we have that day off, but also what we create here and the legacy that that leaves for so many people and the memories that are created. Families unplugging and spending time together, communities getting together at our places of business. In this very chaotic world, gas prices, oil, macroeconomics, interest rates, capital raising, that is second to the memories and creating a place where people can reconnect with nature, with their own families, with each other. We are not in the campground business or the campsite business or the real estate business. We are in the memory making business. And there's so much that I think we talk about the numbers from Memorial Day that I wanted to at least take a moment here today. Like I said, this is a special episode and a really special edition, and I won't labor on for too long here. But I do think it's important, if you can find one moment of rest and relaxation after this really busy holiday, to just think about the business that we're in, the experiences that you can provide, what you do for your team, and how you show up every day. That's the type of stuff that's getting me through being down on sleep, coming out of a tough weekend operationally. It's what makes all of this worth it, and why I think you should be in this business for the first place. I never got into this at 16 for the money. I got into this because of the incredible industry and people that we have, and the incredible people that we get to serve. So with that, I want to, kind of start to wrap up here with the shift, right? I am still, over the long term, and I know Matt would echo this point, very much a believer that outdoor hospitality is in one of the best long-term positions that it has been at for years. You look at the numbers that Toby highlighted in the KOA Camping Report, and more Americans are engaged with nature and camping in a world that has become so connected with AI and tech. And that is a very, very positive sign for the future of our industry. Yes, we will have to adapt. People may not be buying rigs or taking trips the same ways that they used to. Properties may need to deliver different types of experiences and hospitality than they have before. But that next chapter belongs to everybody who's listening, right? You are likely somebody who likes to engage in content like this, who's interested in getting a leg up, in really trying to build the next generation of businesses in outdoor hospitality. And that next chapter is going to go to who's going to evolve, who's going to adapt, and ultimately who's going to put hospitality first. And honestly, I couldn't think of a much better note to leave that on. Hospitality first is the message that I want to reign through to this, that no matter what the numbers look like this Memorial Day, putting that first will still ultimately create the pathway for your business to succeed over the long term. The millions and millions of campers who create memories and become inspired because of the hospitality and the moments that we provide, that can never be replaced. And it's something that we should celebrate and embrace as an industry moving forward, and one where I'm very, very optimistic about all the years to come. So with that, let's leave it on that note. Like I mentioned in the opening, Matt and I will be back here next week for our normal edition of Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. We'll cover some news stories. There's some data and some interesting news I know at Sun Outdoors, as well as some news that I know Matt wants to share as well. But we will be back here next Tuesday for that edition. In the meantime, if there's somebody who needs to hear this message today about Memorial Day and hospitality and really my optimism for the industry moving forward, please feel free to share this. As always, episodes are published wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube and Substack. Subscribe to everywhere that we put that out. It's all free, always going to be free. And with that, I will see everybody back here next week for more. Thanks, everyone.